morning. You're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump says he will extend Iran's ceasefire until negotiations conclude. Hezbollah fires at Israel, accusing it of violating the ceasefire. And Peru's election chief steps down amid frustration over a long voting count. Our top story this morning, US President Donald Trump says he will extend the ceasefire with Iran until talks between them have progressed. Vice President J.D. Vance was due to head to Islamabad on Tuesday to head the negotiations, but the White House told reporters yesterday that he will no longer be attending. The continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is raising fresh doubts about both sides' commitment to de-escalation, and after Trump said it will not be lifted. Here is more.
The United States has extended its two-week ceasefire with Iran just hours before it was set to expire. President Donald Trump announced the decision, saying the pause will continue while Iran's leadership works on a unified proposal for talks. In a post on Truth Social, Trump also said Iran wants the Strait of Hormuz reopened to avoid losing oil revenue. However, he made clear the US will keep it totally blockaded, even as ceasefire talks continue. According to Trump, the move came after requests from Pakistan's military and political leadership. He said the Washington is willing to wait for diplomacy, but remains prepared for action if needed. The US military will also maintain its blockade of Iranian ports during this period. Iran, however, has sharply criticized the blockade. In his ex-post, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called it an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire. He warned that Iran would defend its interests and resist pressure. Some Iranian officials have gone further. An advisor to the Iranian parliament speaker said the blockade should be met with a military response, dismissing the ceasefire extension as meaningless. Meanwhile, uncertainty surrounds a planned second round of talks between the two sides in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Iran has not yet confirmed its participation, citing what it calls inconsistent US actions. Pakistani officials say they are continuing efforts to bring both sides to the table.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we start with Iran and US negotiations, with BBC saying Trump says he will extend Iran's ceasefire until negotiations conclude. Now, our first top story that you would have just seen in that report outlines some of what has been going back and forth between both parties. Now, Donald Trump has said he wants to extend the ceasefire, which was due to end today, this evening, but now says that he wants negotiations to continue to progress and see exactly what comes out of that. Now, the blockade of Iranian ports will continue. That's something that he said that he is not lifting. And we now know that Vice President J.D. Vance, who was set to go to Islamabad to actually head the talks, will no longer be going. He's now told, well, reporters have told, the White House has told reporters that he will no longer be going. And Iran hasn't actually decided on whether to send a delegation to Pakistan yet for talks in regards to everything going on in the war there and the extension of the ceasefire. But the ceasefire has now brought President Trump more time. It actually marks the second time in 2 weeks that Trump backed off from threats to escalate the war, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has commended the ceasefire extension, saying this is an important step toward de-escalation. Now, also oil, which is very key because of the route, the Strait of Hormuz. Global oil prices fluctuated early this morning in Asian markets. The status of the peace talks actually contributed towards that between the US and Iran, because talks still remain unclear. And just lastly on this topic, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave more detail on the US continued naval blockade of Iranian ports, and he actually said on X that in a matter of days, Iran's oil storage facility on the Hague Island will be completely full and the fragile Iranian oil wells will be shut in. So the US is definitely trying to put as much pressure on Iran to bring them to the table table and work out a negotiation to end the war. And the main priority for Trump is to make sure they no longer have any form of nuclear program in the country. Now let's move to our next story, and that is on Al Jazeera's website, and that's in relation to what's going on in El Salvador. A mass trial of nearly 500 alleged gang members are now going on trial. So it's roughly 486 suspected gang members has begun in El Salvador. The trial has begun there. The group are collectively accused of committing more than 47,000 crimes, including murder, extortion, drug and arms trafficking. And I think if we just play the video, you can see exactly how that is looking. These particular crimes took place between 2012 and 2022. UN experts have criticised the use of mass trials, saying that they undermine the exercise of the right to defence. And as you can see there, over 400 members of this particular gang called the MS-13 are accused of 47,000 crimes. But as I said, it's coming up against some criticism from the UN. But the Attorney General's office in El Salvador said it had compelling evidence that would allow maximum penalties to those involved in this to be imposed on anyone that is found guilty. And among those on trial are people alleged to have been involved in a wave of gang violence in March 2022. The Attorney General's office also didn't provide any details to the length of how long the trial would take, but said that 413 suspects were already in custody and arrest warrants had been issued for 73 more others as well, who are to be prosecuted in absentia. Now, supporters of El Salvador's approach to all of this say that fighting crime, say that it's actually made a massive difference to the country. It's made it a safer place. But UN experts have actually warned that this could actually trample on an unfair trial rights in the name of public safety. But we'll keep you updated in regards to that and how things progress in relation to this mass open trial. Okay, now let's go to our next headline making its way this morning, and that's on the Deutsche Welle website, and that's in relation to smoking, a smoking ban that the UK is actually bringing forward. So UK bans sale of disposable vapes, and not just that, children aged 17 or younger will face a lifelong ban on buying cigarettes. Now, the only thing that it's waiting for, as it's gone through some of the legislation and some of the key buy-ins to this, is that the King's signature remains for it to become law, and once that's happened, then this will be in place. Now, it's a landmark legislation aims to stop anyone born after the 1st of January in 2009 from taking up smoking by making it illegal for shops to sell them tobacco and to create a smoke-free generation. So it's part of a series of measures aimed at tackling health effects of smoking, and it's one of the UK's leading causes of preventable deaths, disability and ill health. Now, vaping will be banned in cars carrying children. It will be also banned in playgrounds and outside schools and at hospitals, expanding smoke-free laws. But vaping would still be allowed outside hospitals in a bid to support those trying to quit. And just to add there that the Maldives currently has a very similar generational smoking ban in place, and New Zealand was actually the first country to do this, but it was swiftly overturned when there was a change in government in 2023. But we'll keep you updated in regards to all of that and keep you updated. Okay, so let's go to our fourth headline this morning, and that's on the New York Times website that broke this particular story, and that's in relation to what's happening with Afghans who are currently outside of Afghanistan. Trump is said to be in talks to send Afghans who aided US forces to the Congo. So US government is in talks to send Afghans currently living at a former US base in Qatar to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, that's according to the Afghan evac group that said this, and the Afghans were relocated to Qatar for their own safety after the US-led international forces withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. They had provided assistance to the military, some 1,100 Afghans, and around 400 of them, as you can see in this particular picture there, of them are children staying in a camp in Qatar. Now, the group includes interpreters who work for the US military, Afghan military commandos, and family members of US soldiers. Now, Afghan evac said the plan to send them to the Congo is actually an attempt to manufacture a refusal offer these families relocation to an active war zone in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, knowing that they cannot accept, wait for the predictable no, then use no as the public justification for sending them back to Afghanistan, is what the Afghan Evac Committee group said in a statement. They think that it's there's a bigger agenda in regards to that, because offering Democratic of Congo as a place to go is not safe for them, and going back to Afghanistan is definitely not a safer option either. But that is currently one of the news stories making its way across this morning, but we'll keep you updated as to how things go and if there are any new things that come out in the next couple of hours. But that's your press roundup for now. Now I'm going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. Renewed tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border come as Lebanon's Prime Minister insists his government is pursuing diplomacy while refusing to be intimidated. The flare-up follows fresh exchanges of fire that are testing a fragile ceasefire just days before talks resume.
Tensions between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah have flared again despite a fragile ceasefire, as both sides accuse each other of violations ahead of renewed US-mediated talks. Hezbollah said it fired rockets and launched drones toward northern Israel on Tuesday, calling the attack a response to what it described as repeated Israeli breaches of the truce, including strikes on civilian areas in southern Lebanon. The group said it targeted an Israeli artillery position it blamed for the attacks. The Israeli military confirmed rockets were fired at its troops operating in southern Lebanon, describing the incident as a blatant violation of the ceasefire. Sirens sounded in several northern Israeli communities, but no casualties were reported. The escalation comes just days after a 10-day ceasefire brokered by Washington took effect. Despite the agreement, Israeli forces remain deployed in a security zone several kilometres deep inside southern Lebanon, which Israel says is necessary to protect its northern areas from further attacks. Speaking alongside French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said his government is committed to negotiations but will not be intimidated.
Cela dit, on ne cherche pas la confrontation.
That said, we're not seeking a confrontation with Hezbollah. On the contrary, I prefer to avoid a confrontation with Hezbollah, but believe me, we won't be intimidated, not by Hezbollah and certainly not by those who are blowing the hot and cold air of civil war.
Diplomatic efforts are continuing in parallel. A second round of ambassador-level talks between Israel and Lebanon is expected to take place in Washington later this week.
Argentine President Javier Milei took part in Israel's Independence Day celebrations in Jerusalem on Tuesday, lighting an honorary torch during rehearsals ahead of the official ceremony. The appearance came during his third visit to Israel, with local media reporting the segment was recorded before his departure. And as you can see here, during the event, Milei also joined performers in singing the Spanish song Libre, which means free in English. US President Donald Trump took part in a marathon Bible reading event held in Washington, D.C. The event marked the 250th anniversary of the US Declaration of Independence and featured continuous scripture readings. In his remarks, Trump read a passage from the Old Testament focused on repentance and divine guidance.
Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord, and in his own house he prosperously effected. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place to myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven, that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
To Europe, and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has said the Druzhba pipeline, which carries Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia, is ready to resume operations. This comes a day after Hungarian election winner Peter Major urged Ukraine to reopen the passageway. Here's what Zelensky said in his evening address.
It is important that the unblocking of the European support package for Ukraine takes place. 90 billion euros over 2 years. These are funds which had already been approved by the European Council, but were being blocked. There are no grounds for blocking it now. The European Union asked Ukraine to repair the Druzhba oil pipeline, which was bombed by Russia. We have repaired it. We hope that the European Union will also deliver on its commitments.
Staying on the Druzhba pipeline, Russia says it will stop all oil exports from Kazakhstan to Germany from May, according to a report by Reuters. Sources familiar with the matter say a revised export schedule has already been sent to both countries. Kazakhstan has been supplying crude oil to Germany through the northern branch of the Druzhba pipeline. Volumes along this route have risen significantly, reaching around 2.15 million tons last year. A potential halt in these flows could further strain Germany's fuel supply amid ongoing disruptions in the Middle East. Russia says the safety of its citizens in Moldova's breakaway Transnistria region is under threat and warns it is ready to take all necessary steps to protect them. Secretary of Russia's Security Council said Moscow would not rule out any options, claiming that more than 220,000 Russian citizens live in the region and are facing risks from actions by Kyiv and Chisinau. A pro-Russian separatist region bordering Ukraine broke away from Moldova in the early 1990s and has remained outside government control ever since. Now to the world of online gaming, where millions of children interact daily. Now, Australia's regulators say that those spaces can also expose young users to serious risks if not properly controlled, and is demanding accountability from some of the biggest names in the industry.
Australia's online safety regulator has ordered major gaming platforms to explain how they protect children from harm. The E-Safety Commission issued legal notices to companies including Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite and Steam. These notices require details on safety systems, moderation and staffing. Companies that fail to respond could face fines or legal action. The regulator says online games are now major social spaces for children. In Australia, 9 out of 10 young people aged 8 to 17 play online games. Officials warn that predators are using gaming platforms to contact children, often moving conversations to private messaging apps, with concerns also raised about exposure to extremist content within gaming environments. This action is part of a wider push by Australia to reduce online risks for minors. Last year, the government banned under-16s from major social media platforms. However, regulators say many children are still accessing those services despite the restrictions. Meanwhile, Roblox is facing more than 140 lawsuits in the United States. The cases allege the company failed to prevent the sexual exploitation of children. This week, Roblox agreed to pay over $23 million to settle claims brought by 2 US states. The company has also announced new account features designed specifically for younger users.
Now to North America, and a criminal investigation has been launched into OpenAI and ChatGPT over a deadly shooting last year that killed 2 people at Florida State University, state officials say. The suspect, Venus Ickner, submitted multiple queries to ChatGPT prior to the attack and, according to the chatbot, advised the shooter on the weapons and ammunition along with what time of day would be most appropriate for the shooting to interact with more people and where on the campus would be the best place to encounter a higher population. A court in El Salvador has begun a mass trial of more than 400 alleged leaders of a criminal gang, commonly known as MS-13, in a case linked to tens of thousands of crimes over a 10-year period. Prosecutors say 486 defendants are accused of ordering murders, extortion, arms trafficking and forced disappearances between 2012 and 2022, while also attempting to establish parallel territorial control through violence. The prosecutor's office is seeking maximum prison sentences for each charge, meaning some defendants could face up to 245 years in prison if convicted on all counts. After a chaotic first round of elections in Peru, the country's electoral chief has resigned. This comes in the middle of accusations of fraud in the count, as the final round of elections are scheduled for June. Here's more.
The head of Peru's election authority, Piero Corvetto, stepped down on Tuesday amid widespread anger over the country's chaotic general election earlier this month, with vote counting still ongoing. The April 12th election had to be extended by an additional day after voting materials failed to reach more than a dozen centres in Lima, preventing over 52,000 people from casting their ballots on time. In his resignation letter, Corvetto denied any wrongdoing, but said the issues encountered during the election prompted his decision in order to restore confidence ahead of a runoff vote scheduled for June. Some politicians have welcomed his departure and are calling for an investigation into the first round of voting.
With the runoff ahead, this was good news for Peru and good news for Peruvians that this man stepped aside. Beyond his departure, I also think it was very important for the relevant institutions, the Comptroller's Office, the National Board of Justice, the Public Prosecutor's Office, and the press itself to look into what happened in this first round.
The system matters more than the individual. A well-organized system is more reliable than any one office holder, but if action has to be taken, then it should be taken properly and with due process.
An electoral observation mission from the European Union said earlier that while the vote faced logistical challenges, it found no evidence of fraud in the count. Peru's electoral tribunal has set a May 15th deadline for final results, with the top two candidates set to advance to a runoff. The winner will become Peru's 9th president in just 10 years and will replace José María Balcázar, who was elected interim president in February.
Mexico has launched an investigation into a possible breach of its constitution after it was reported that 2 U.S. embassy officials died in a car accident. The officials were returning from a raid on a drug lab with local officials in the northern state of Chihuahua. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum had this to say.
Estamos investigando lo que estaban haciendo estas personas.
We are investigating what these people were doing and which agency they were from. So far, the information we have is that they were indeed working together. Let's put it that way. So the Attorney's Office needs to conduct a full investigation to determine if the Constitution or the national security law was violated, and the Chihuahua state authorities need to provide all the truthful information.
Romania has recovered some of its most valuable ancient artifacts, including the golden helmet of Cotopaxi, after a theft from a museum in the Netherlands last year. The items have now been returned under tight security and put back in display in Bucharest. Here's more.
Romania has welcomed back some of its most valuable ancient artifacts, including the golden helmet of Cotopaxi, after they were recovered from a museum theft in the Netherlands. The 2,500-year-old helmet and 2 gold bracelets were returned under tight security and unveiled at the National Museum of Romanian History in Bucharest. The pieces, considered among the country's most important archaeological treasures, date back to the ancient Ghetto-Dacian civilization. The artifacts were stolen last year when thieves broke into a Dutch museum using explosives. Suspects were later arrested, and information provided during legal proceedings helped authorities recover the items. Security around their return was extensive, with armoured vehicles and gendarmerie escorts accompanying the artifacts throughout their journey. Authorities say another bracelet linked to the theft remains missing.
Over to a quick break now. When I return, I'll be looking at the regional headlines and also be joined by a guest to go over some key stories in the region. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's head to the stories in the region, and we go first to look at what's taking place in relation to Syria. Now, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met interim President of Syria Ahmad al-Shara in Jeddah on Tuesday to discuss bilateral ties and ways to expand cooperation. The talks focused on strengthening collaboration across multiple sectors. Both sides also reviewed regional developments and efforts to coordinate their positions. Turkish National Defence Minister Yasar Güler met NATO Security General Mark Rutte in Ankara during an official visit on Tuesday. The talks took place at the Ministry of National Defence, according to a statement shared on the ministry's social media account. No further details of the discussions were immediately released.
Thank you for coming. How's life?
This building is so full of history, I remember. Maybe again shaking hands.
A military transport helicopter belonging to the Turkish land forces has crash-landed during a training flight in Ankara, with investigations now underway. According to initial information, the incident occurred as the CH-47 heavy lift helicopter was attempting to land during the training exercise. Authorities confirmed that 5 personnel on board were affected and have been taken to hospital. There were no fatalities. Search and rescue teams from the Turkish armed forces, along with military officials, continue to examine the scene. Georgian President Mikhail Kavlishvili is on a working visit to Kazakhstan. During his trip, he is set to participate in a regional ecological summit. The Georgian president is scheduled to address the summit's plenary session. This forum is held in partnership with the United Nations and will focus on the growing challenges posed by climate change. Leaders from across the region are expected to attend, including the presidents of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Mongolia, and Armenia, as well as Azerbaijan's Prime Minister Ali Azadov. Romania's foreign minister has stressed Azerbaijan's importance in energy and regional connectivity ahead of the EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Luxembourg. The remarks come amidst ongoing efforts in Europe to diversify energy routes and expand east-west connectivity corridors, with Azerbaijan playing an increasingly prominent role. Joining me now is political analyst Fuad Karamli to discuss this in more detail. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
My first question in this is, Romania's foreign minister has highlighted Azerbaijan's key role, as I mentioned, in energy, infrastructure and connectivity. How should we interpret this emphasis in the broader context of Europe's current energy diversification strategy?
So first of all, we should really look at it in the context of Europe trying to diversify its energy routes, energy supply specifically. So with the ongoing war in Ukraine, they faced a lot of instability, especially during harsh winter times. And we saw that actually Azerbaijan increased its natural gas exports to the EU region, many countries in the EU region. But this specific shift into green energy, it shows that the EU really does take into consideration the South Caucasus as a regional bloc. So it's Azerbaijan and Georgia in this project. So the green energy corridor is something really big. It's something that's been ongoing for the past few years, been talked about. But now it really materializing. It shows that the EU really understands that Azerbaijan is specifically a reliable partner in terms of green energy for the future of the EU.
Yes, which is very key, especially for this particular region. She also referred to consultations with the South Caucasus countries, as you mentioned, but all three, including Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia. Yeah. In that sense, to what extent does this signal a more coordinated or balanced EU approach to the region rather than a singular focus?
When we see that the Romanian foreign minister talked about specifically the region as a whole, including Armenia, So whereas the energy corridor, it actually includes Azerbaijan and Georgia. So there's a submarine cable planned that would go through Georgia and under the Black Sea and reach EU. Inclusion of Armenia, I think it shows the willingness of EU to participate in the peace process. So they see a process that's going on. They support it, which is really good. And this kind of energy interdependence and including Armenia in it, I think at least it shows that the EU doesn't want to be left out of this process, and really it is a good thing overall that they would support this as well, regional connectivity. Yes,
because I guess you could say they're also diversifying their energy options and looking in other areas across the globe as to where this could be, partnerships could be formed. And what are the key benefits then, therefore, for the European Union in that?
So first of all, I think the EU has been struggling a lot with energy security in the past few years. They were really dependent on Russia. Now they're importing a lot of liquefied natural gas. It's really expensive, especially, like I just said, in the winter times it becomes really harsh, and it really does weigh a toll on the population. So I think specifically when we go back to the regional dynamic, them mentioning all three countries of the South Caucasus, it shows that they really understand that the future, at least the way we see it in this region, is peaceful and stable. So looking at diversifying the routes, it shows that they know that this region is a stable region that they can import energy from, and not just gas, but for the future, at least green energy as well.
Yes. There's also a clear link in her remarks between infrastructure development, economic benefits, and the everyday welfare of citizens. Now, how significant is that framing in shaping public and political support for deeper EU engagement in the South Caucasus?
For them, I think it talks about, it goes into the topic of actually having less energy prices, so like decrease in energy prices. So yes, it will create benefit for them, for the population in the EU. Having a stable supply of energy, having more supply means less cost for them, but also on this side as well. If the EU is really interested in this, they're going to invest, they're going to fund these projects. The green energy, there's big potential in Karabakh for this, the solar, the wind. Azerbaijan has really been developing this in the past few years, and I think EU is really aware of this possibility. We've seen the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development invest into a lot of green energy projects in rural areas of Azerbaijan as well. So I think this is not just a recent event, it's been something that's been ongoing, but I think the peace process really did facilitate it a lot.
And the statement places also Azerbaijan at the centre of connectivity discussions. What practical projects or corridors are likely being referenced here, and how viable are they in the current geopolitical climate?
I think when we look at it, specifically the middle corridor is what comes up first. So when we look at the north, when we look at the south, there's conflict, there's instability, supply chains are diminishing. We see what's happening in Iran, what's been happening in Russia for the past few years with Ukraine. And after decades-long conflict, now there's really peace. And the precedent that's set between Azerbaijan and Armenia with recent economic cooperation, it shows that we're living together, we're learning to live in peace, we're learning to trade with each other and provide economic benefit for both countries, but Georgia as well. Why not expand this further? The EU, I think, finally understands that the South Caucasus is not just a peripheral region, but something that's really of strategic importance for its own energy security as well, and hopefully for the welfare of both citizens of both regions.
And how does the South Caucasus manage new interest then in this particular region? You've got the EU very much wanting to be part of it and diversify its energy supplies, but you've also got China on the other side, Russia as well still really want to maintain its influence, and now the US with the Trip Corridor route. How does the South Caucasus manage all those expectations and new interest in investment?
Well, when we look at all of these dynamics, it's really the proliferation of the multilateral world, right? So this is the reality that we're facing right now. From my point of view, I don't think it's a challenge, it's an opportunity. It's a situation for Azerbaijan to set its own rules in its own regions and really show that we stand on the side of international law, of cooperation, of connectivity. It doesn't mean that we disregard one country for another. On the opposite, actually, on the contrary, we foster cooperation. So the Middle Corridor. It's a transit route that connects China with the EU. We see US being involved in the trip corridor. We see that there's a lot of increased interest in this region from all different regions, all different countries. And I think personally, this is all because they saw the progress that Azerbaijan has been making in the past few years in terms of investing into green energy, developing Karabakh, and showing the fact that we can live in peace with one of the longest conflicts in the region. You know, it's really a significant event that this peace is happening right now, and it all depends on the regional countries to really push it forward.
And how would you, I don't know, position, or what could you forecast in the next 10, 20 years when it comes to Azerbaijan and the South Caucasus and being that bridge, as you mentioned, between China, the EU, you know, through Turkey and Armenia, kind of like all working together to make sure that these pipelines are in place? How could that propel Azerbaijan further?
So we actually see the foundations of it being laid now. We see Azerbaijan in close contact with Kazakhstan, having this kind of connection to the Caspian Sea. It really is this neutral, stable corridor that is here right now and hopefully will stay here for the long haul. And it does open up new trade routes, new energy routes through China, through the South Caucasus to the EU. But with the trip, we see that the US doesn't want to be left out either. So really, it is a stable position that Azerbaijan is in, but it also includes Central Asia and China. It's just balancing everyone, and who doesn't want economic benefit, right? Who doesn't want to prosper? Who doesn't want less energy prices? Green energy, we're transitioning away from fossil fuels, so investment into that is crucial. So if Azerbaijan is in this corridor, the countries that are interested in it have to invest and really make it prosper, you know, because it's not something that's done alone. These connectivity projects require a lot of investment. It's not just fuel, natural gas, oil, but also green energy requires a lot of investment into the cables.
Yes, and it's hard to get away from this subject, but the conflict in the Middle East when it comes to Iran, who we already share, Azerbaijan shares a border with, I don't know, how impactful has the war been in relation to, obviously we've seen a lack of oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, which has very much toppled global markets, and countries are very much in need of that. But then also on the other hand, show or highlight other countries that are able to not necessarily fill the gap, but diversify different energy options. And could you see that as Iran also wanting to participate in other forms of energy sharing, or even making sure the South Caucasus are just as strong in this area as well?
Well, it all depends on what kind of energy we're talking about. So if it's fossil fuels or renewable energy, yes, for the beginning of this year, Brent crude was projected to be at $60 per barrel and actually dropped to 55. So that was a real shift specifically for Azerbaijan as well, but all oil-producing countries. And then with the war that's taking place now, it skyrocketed to over $100 per barrel, something that we haven't seen in a long time. It really does show the volatility of oil. Yes, I mean, it does benefit the countries that produce oil in the long term because prices are high, but the countries that are dependent on it are really struggling, and we see this from the EU. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the Romanian foreign minister is talking about diversifying energy routes to green energy as well, because they're already importing natural gas from us. So it is really crucial for these countries to diversify. Azerbaijan is on that path already, but Iran, the war, you know, the oil is something that's really important for Iran, specifically in terms of income. So unless there's peace, I don't think there's going to be any kind of involvement in the regional, broader context. Although Iran doesn't really, you know, promote any kind of renewed conflict in the South Caucasus, there's good relations between Azerbaijan and the whole region with Iran. We're kind of like this stability in the region. But yeah, the diversification has to take place. Yes,
which is obviously with more interest, we're seeing it more and more as countries pay attention to the South Caucasus. Just finally, with staying on this particular subject and the EU's involvement, is the EU increasingly focused on strengthening ties with its eastern partners, especially how might this renewed emphasis on connectivity and regional cooperation influence long-term integration pathways for countries in the South Caucasus?
Well, when we talk about integration, the first thing that comes to mind is always membership. So we can ask the question of how realistic it is for the South Caucasus countries to have EU membership. In my personal opinion, it's not really a close ideal because It's not the first item of agenda for any of the South Caucasus countries. Yes, they can state it, yes, they can talk about regional connectivity, but then we have to take into consideration regional geopolitics taking place, as well as the national interest of the countries. Do they really want to be a member of the EU? But this kind of connectivity does, increase interconnectedness. So we really do see regional blocks emerging. It doesn't mean that when regional blocks emerge, they have to converge with the others or be absorbed into them. They can be their own separate entity, but still collaborate with other blocks as well.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for your insights on that.
Thank you
that's been very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Kamrali. There. Thank you. Now, turning to Afghanistan, and Afghanistan's Baghlan province is receiving an influx of families forced to return from neighbouring countries, Iran and Pakistan in particular. This is putting additional pressure on communities already struggling with limited resources and food insecurity. Our correspondent, Tamim Bahis, reports from Baghlan.
I am in Baghlan, where families who have returned from Iran and Pakistan are trying to restart their lives with very little. Many come back with few belongings, no stable income, and uncertainty over where they will live, how they will feed their children, and whether any support will last beyond the first days of return. Afghanistan is facing one of the world's largest return movements. The UN Refugee Agency says around 5.4 million Afghans have returned from Iran and Pakistan since October 2023, with 2.9 million returning in 2025 alone. Aid agencies warn the scale of returns is pushing already fragile services to the limit.
When we returned from Pakistan, it was raining heavily. We had children with us, and we had to stay at Umari camp for 2 days. One for my family, and the other for my son and his family, who live separately. Not only us, but in the Kelagai area, more than 200 families have returned from neighbouring countries. In areas such as Puli Kumri, Kenjan, and Karkar, no one has received any support since returning. Until now, we do not have proper accommodation or emergency supplies. Most of the walls are destroyed, and we have covered the rooms with tarps.
The humanitarian picture is already severe. UNICEF says 21.9 million people in Afghanistan, including 11.6 million children, will need humanitarian assistance this year. WHO say 14.4 million people will need health assistance, while aid groups warn malnutrition is worsening among children.
It was during the cold winter days that we came back, and when we arrived, we stayed in a refugee camp. It was raining and snowing when we arrived, and we had women and children with us. Because of the rain and snow, the children and even I became sick. We faced many hardships. During our journey back, we also experienced many difficulties.
For families here, the crisis does not end at the border. The challenge is reintegration, finding work, shelter, healthcare, and enough food in communities that are already under pressure. The UN says women and children make up most of the latest assisted returns, and agencies warn that without more support, many families could fail deeper into poverty. A new UN Women report says only 17% of Afghan women returnees from Iran and Pakistan are earning an income. The study found many women returned with skills, but face shrinking job opportunities and lack of tools or capital to start again.
When the returnees came back from Pakistan, they were initially supported with cash by the Islamic Emirate. The number of those who returned to Kelagai village in Baghlan province is around 930 to 950 families. These poor people are facing many challenges, and we urge international organizations and countries to support them. Most of them are living in tents, while some are staying with us in our homes. They arrived during the winter, and we supported them as much as we could. We hope they will be able to build their own homes, but unfortunately, they are not able to rebuild at this time. They are facing difficulties in almost every area of life, including access to health centers and educational facilities. We ask governments to support these people, as they are dealing with many hardships. Most of them have also suffered from floods. We urge the international community to support them.
Afghan authorities say support is being provided in areas such as transport, housing, healthcare and food. But with returns continuing and aid funding under pressure, many families in places like Baghlan say survival, not recovery, remains their immediate goal.
Global energy concerns are back in focus as Xi Jinping underscores the need to keep one of the world's most critical shipping routes open amid rising tensions and fears over supply disruptions. Our Manoon Makdoum correspondent picked this up for us.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has highlighted the importance of maintaining normal passage through the Strait of Hormuz during a phone call with the Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. During the conversation, President Xi highlighted that the security and stability of the strait are crucial for safeguarding global energy supply chains and ensuring the steady flow of international trade. He stressed that disruptions in the vital maritime corridor could have far-reaching consequences for the world economy, urging all parties to act responsibly and avoid actions that could escalate tensions. She also reiterated China's consistent position in favor of dialogue and diplomatic solutions, calling for greater international efforts to de-escalate the situation and maintain regional peace. He emphasized that cooperation among regional countries is essential to preserving stability in the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most important transit routes, with roughly a fifth of global oil consumption passing through it each day. Any disruption to shipping in the corridor has historically led to immediate concerns over supply security and price stability in global energy markets. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, with a significant share of its supplies originating from Gulf producers, including Saudi Arabia. Ensuring uninterrupted maritime access through the strait is therefore directly linked to China's domestic energy security and broader economic stability. During the current rising geopolitical uncertainty, Beijing has continued to position itself as a stabilizing force, advocating for open sea lanes and collective security to support global economic recovery. Manoon Makdoum, A News, Beijing.
It's now time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me. Hello, you're watching Daybreak here live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I am your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump says he will extend Iran's ceasefire until negotiations conclude. Hezbollah fires at Israel, accusing it of violating the ceasefire. And Peru's election chief steps down amid frustration over long voting count. Now let's take a look at the stories making the front pages this morning, and we head first to the Guardian website and what's taking place in relation to 2 Israeli soldiers who've now been jailed over smashing of Jesus statue in Lebanon village. Now these soldiers have now been removed from combat duty and sentenced to 30 days in jail after one used a sledgehammer to smash a statue of Jesus in a southern Lebanon village, as you can see here by the the main photo there, while the other soldier filmed him doing this, which is why we have the footage, well, at least a screen grab of what took place. Now, the Israel Defense Forces said this, and they investigated into it. Now, it came after an image circulating on social media on Monday showed the Israeli soldier using a sledgehammer to strike the head of a statue of a crucified Jesus that had fallen from its cross in the Christian village in southern Lebanon near the border with Israel. Now, this prompted outrage among Christian communities worldwide, and then the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, launched an investigation into it and later concluded the soldiers' conduct was completely deviated from IDF orders and values. The IDF now say that it has removed from combat duty both the soldier who damaged the statue and the one who filmed the act, sentencing them to 30 days in military prison. Now, this type of punishment is relatively rare in the Israeli military, and that's according to rights groups. But that's one of the key stories making its headlines throughout this morning. Now, let's turn to what's taking place over on the New York Times in relation to Afghanistan and what Trump has been stating. And he said that he's said to be in talks to send Afghans who aided US forces to Congo. Now, the US government is in talks to send Afghanistans currently living in the former US base in Qatar to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's according to the Evac group that said this on the Tuesday. Now, the Afghans were relocated to Qatar for their own safety after a US-led international forces withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. They provided assistance to the US military, and it's some 1,100 Afghans are currently in Qatar, and around 400 of them are children staying in a camp there. Now, the group includes interpreters who worked for the US military, Afghan military commandos, family members of US soldiers. Afghan Evac said the plan to send them to the Congo was an attempt to manufacture a refusal, is what they said, and offer these families relocation to an active war zone in the Democratic Republic of Congo, knowing they cannot accept, wait for the predictable no, then use that no as a public justification for sending them back to Afghanistan. That's what the Afghan Evac Committee said in a statement. But we'll keep you informed. New York Times were the first to break this particular story, and more information will be coming out of that in the coming days. And hopefully we'll get more information on what the Democratic Republic of Congo has to say about this, as well as whether or not the US directly wants that also to continue to happen. Now, let's turn to our third story this morning, and that is on Iran and US negotiations and what's been taking place there and what we currently know. We now know that Donald Trump has said that he will extend the ceasefire with Iran until negotiations conclude. The two have been trying to come together since Pakistan has been the mediator between the two, making sure that Islamabad is prepared to receive both delegates from both countries to find out to see if they can come to a deal. Right now, the ceasefire was due to finish on the Wednesday today, this evening, but President Donald Trump has decided to extend that. However, the blockade of Iranian ports will continue to be in place, is what President Donald Trump has said for the main part. It's still unclear whether or not Iran will send a delegation team to Pakistan for talks with the US, as that's still up in the air. And we now know that Vice President J.D. Vance is no longer heading to Islamabad. The White House confirmed this with reporters on Tuesday to say that he is no longer going. So it's quite interesting how things has changed quite rapidly from when we knew at the beginning of this week that he was heading over to Islamabad to head the talks with Iran, but now that's no longer taking place. However, talks will hopefully still take place with the current team that is out there, and should hopefully get some more information on that. We now go to our correspondent in Washington, who has more information in relation to this top story.
The ceasefire with Iran has been extended by order of President Donald Trump following consultations with Pakistani leadership. In a social media post on Tuesday, President Trump announced that the ceasefire extension with Iran was necessary because of what he described as serious fracturing within the Iranian government between opposing factions that were delaying negotiations. The extension came mere hours before the deadline and the resumption of military operations. Vice President J.D. Vance's planned trip to Islamabad has been delayed by the White House, once it became clear that the new Iranian leadership was unable to agree among competing factions on whether to continue the talks with the Americans. President Trump said that the ceasefire will last, quote, until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded, one way or the other. Trump said that he has directed the U.S. military to continue the naval blockade against Iran's ports and to remain ready and able to resume the war if required. Reports here in Washington say that American mediators have been waiting for the Iranian Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei to respond to the latest proposal and to give a clear directive to his negotiators. In the meantime, the U.S. Navy continues to interdict sanctioned Iranian oil tankers as part of the U.S. pressure campaign on Iran. The Pentagon released video footage of U.S. troops rappelling from a helicopter onto the decks of one such Iranian vessel in the Indian Ocean. In a statement, U.S. military officials said that the Navy will continue to interdict sanctioned vessels providing material support to Iran anywhere that they operate. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Staying in the Middle East, renewed tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border come as Lebanon's Prime Minister insists his government is pursuing diplomacy while refusing to be intimidated. The flare-up follows fresh exchanges of fire that are testing the fragile ceasefire just days before talks resume in Washington.
Tensions between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah have flared again despite a fragile ceasefire, as both sides accuse each other of violations ahead of renewed US-mediated talks. Hezbollah said it fired rockets and launched drones toward northern Israel on Tuesday, calling the attack a response to what it described as repeated Israeli breaches of the truce, including strikes on civilian areas in southern Lebanon. The group said it targeted an Israeli artillery position it blamed for the attacks. The Israeli military confirmed rockets were fired at its troops operating in southern Lebanon, describing the incident as a blatant violation of the ceasefire. Sirens sounded in several northern Israeli communities, but no casualties were reported. The escalation comes just days after a 10-day ceasefire brokered by Washington took effect. Despite the agreement, Israeli forces remain deployed in a security zone several kilometres deep inside southern Lebanon, which Israel says is necessary to protect its northern areas from further attacks. Speaking alongside French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said his government is committed to negotiations but will not be intimidated.
Cela dit, on ne cherche pas la confrontation.
That said, we're not seeking a confrontation with Hezbollah. On the contrary, I prefer to avoid a confrontation with Hezbollah, but believe me, we won't be intimidated, not by Hezbollah and certainly not by those who are blowing the hot and cold air of civil war.
Diplomatic efforts are continuing in parallel. A second round of ambassador-level talks between Israel and Lebanon is expected to take place in Washington later this week.
Now to the world of online gaming, where millions of children interact daily. Now, Australia's regulators say those spaces can only also expose young users to serious risks if not properly controlled, and is demanding accountability from some of the biggest names in the industry.
Australia's online safety regulator has ordered major gaming platforms to explain how they protect children from harm. The E-Safety Commission issued legal notices to companies including Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite and Steam. These notices require details on safety systems, moderation and staffing. Companies that fail to respond could face fines or legal action. The regulator says online games are now major social spaces for children. In Australia, 9 out of 10 young people aged 8 to 17 play online games. Officials warn that predators are using gaming platforms to contact children, often moving conversations to private messaging apps, with concerns also raised about exposure to extremist content within gaming environments. This action is part of a wider push by Australia to reduce online risks for minors. Last year, the government banned under-16s from major social media platforms. However, regulators say many children are still accessing those services despite the restrictions. Meanwhile, Roblox is facing more than 140 lawsuits in the United States. The cases allege the company failed to prevent the sexual exploitation of children. This week, Roblox agreed to pay over $23 million to settle claims brought by 2 US states. The company has also announced new account features designed specifically for younger users.
After a chaotic first round of elections in Peru, the country's electoral chief has resigned. This comes in the middle of accusations of fraud in the count, as the final round of elections are scheduled for June.
The head of Peru's election authority, Piero Corvetto, stepped down on Tuesday amid widespread anger over the country's chaotic general election earlier this month, with vote counting still ongoing. The April 12th election had to be extended by an additional day after voting materials failed to reach more than a dozen centres in Lima, preventing over 52,000 people from casting their ballots on time. In his resignation letter, Corvetto denied any wrongdoing, but said the issues encountered during the election prompted his decision in order to restore confidence ahead of a runoff vote scheduled for June. Some politicians have welcomed his departure and are calling for an investigation into the first round of voting.
With the runoff ahead, this was good news for Peru and good news for Peruvians that this man stepped aside. Beyond his departure, I also think it was very important for the relevant institutions, the Comptroller's Office, the National Board of Justice, the Public Prosecutor's Office, and the press itself to look into what happened in this first round.
The system matters more than the individual. A well-organized system is more reliable than any one office holder. But if action has to be taken, then it should be taken properly and with due process.
An electoral observation mission from the European Union said earlier that while the vote faced logistical challenges, it found no evidence of fraud in the count. Peru's electoral tribunal has set a May 15th deadline for final results, with the top 2 candidates set to advance to a runoff. The winner will become Peru's 9th president in just 10 years and will replace José María Balcázar, who was elected interim president in February.
Now let's turn to East Asia, and the Taiwan stock market has overtaken London stock market as the Pacific Islands technology firms cash in on the AI boom. The value of Taiwan's listed firms hit £3.05 trillion last week, overtaking the £3.02 trillion total value of companies listed in London. Taiwan's market is now the world's 7th largest and is home to the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the largest global producer of the chips used in the technology. Joining me now from Taipei to discuss this achievement is political analyst Ross Feingold. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
My first question in this is Taiwan's AI tech boom has propelled its stock market, but what does that mean for its economy and overall standing in the global market? What else might this bring?
Yeah, those are really good questions. And actually, even here in Taiwan, it's a bit of a struggle how to answer those questions, because clearly the boom in demand for AI chips and servers has greatly benefited Taiwan tech companies. As you mentioned, TSMC is by far the leading manufacturer of the most advanced chips. And it's not just TSMC, there are other companies here in Taiwan in the supply chain for AI chips and servers and other related equipment that benefit substantially, and that's powered the stock market boom. But where we get into a more complex discussion is, what does it mean for the wider economy? Not everybody is a computer science engineer. Not everybody is part of the tech supply chain. And Taiwan has a population of 23 million people and a very complex economy. And large parts of the economy are still traditional industries. And some of those traditional industries do have to compete with neighboring countries where Taiwan is not part of regional trade agreements, for example. Other places might have lower costs than Taiwan. So we do see a growing wealth gap, for example, here in Taiwan, because not everybody benefits. Now, when it comes to Taiwan's place in the world. Of course, there's the threat of invasion from China, and that's a concern, not just for policymakers or people here in Taiwan, but it's concern for policymakers in other countries as well, knowing that so many of their own tech companies rely on Taiwan's tech manufacturing supply chain. And that's prompted Japan, the United States, and the European Union to offer huge subsidies to persuade Taiwan companies to move some of their tech manufacturing to those locations. So it's a really interesting conundrum because on the one hand, Taiwan wants to maintain that role. On the other hand, countries are saying, well, it's kind of risky to rely on manufacturing in Taiwan. So move some of that manufacturing to our countries. And then Taiwan government is kind of caught in the middle between working with those partners, but also keeping industry here in Taiwan.
That is a challenge for them. They're caught in, I don't know, in a lucrative space, you could say. That it's a benefit, but also it's a little bit of a conundrum, as you mentioned. But in all of this, who really benefits from this? And could Taiwan's stock market continue to grow as AI continues to further develop? Could it help it move up the global stock market ladder? And what would that mean for the small island?
Well, certainly people who own shares have benefited. There's lots of people who've become very wealthy because they own shares in TSMC or other companies. And that includes a lot of retail investors here in Taiwan. It certainly includes the employees of these companies because these companies do pay generous bonuses in shares. And Taiwan's stock market is for many, many decades already, is quite open to foreign investors as well. So there are a lot of institutional investors from outside Taiwan that hold shares in Taiwan, and they've benefited substantially, very, very healthy returns in recent years with the increase in the Taiwan stock market. The big mystery here is, again, we just can't avoid that discussion about the geopolitical issues and the threat of military action by China. And the first thing that would happen should those tensions continue to increase, and they have been increasing, is the foreign investors would flee because they could just take their money out of Taiwan literally within hours or days, and then there could be a crash. So the issues are not just whether or not AI is a boom or a bubble that could burst, but also, again, the geopolitical risk is significant.
And just with that, then, what can Taiwan do to kind of safeguard that? Like, the possible outcomes if this was to happen. We know that China is very much has always said that it doesn't recognize Taiwan as a separate entity, that it's part of China, and really wants to take it back. With this on, the cusp of all of that, what can Taiwan really do? Because this is now peaked on everyone's scale. I'm sure China is very much monitoring this very closely. So where does that leave them, and what safeguards could they put in place?
To be fair to policymakers here in Taiwan, and this is going across successive governments over literally decades, they've been a good friend to the tech industry. The government has provided land and made sure there's sufficient power and water, which sometimes angers other competing interest groups in Taiwan. But subsidies, tax breaks, the government really has been a partner to the tech industry, and that's why Taiwan's tech industry plays such an important role. And I think policymakers will continue to do that regardless of which political party is in control of Taiwan at any given point in time. But the current government under President William Lai has also been seeking a significant increase in defense spending from the legislature, which is controlled by the opposition, and it's become quite contentious. But obviously, from the current government's perspective here in Taiwan, what they want to do is to tell their partners, like the United States and Japan and the European Union, that they are trying to invest more in Taiwan's defense to reduce that risk of a military invasion. The problem there is China invests such enormous amounts of money in its military, it's very, very difficult to keep up. So at the moment, investors are not fleeing Taiwan, not at all. And we see that with the rapid increase in the stock market in recent years. But could that day come if the military risk continues to increase? It's certainly a possibility.
And just on that, in relation to China's influence, especially as you mentioned, it has a bit more of a mightier economical power. The leader in Taiwan actually tried to head over to an African country recently, but was unable to because of China's influential relationships with a number of other African countries, and told Taiwan that it could not fly over its particular airspace. What does this tell us about the wider issue relating to China and Taiwan, and where can they really build themselves, especially now that they've been able to achieve this particular success along the stock market?
China is not talking to the current government of Taiwan, the elected government. It refuses to do so because the current elected government does not accept the terms of how the two sides could engage with each other, which has to do with how each side sees the relationship. Are they part of one China, or are they different countries? So China and Taiwan are not talking to each other. And as part of that political dispute, China does seek to restrict Taiwan's international space. Now, would the visit of Taiwan's President Lai to Eswatini, which was where he intended to go, because Eswatini has diplomatic relations with Taiwan, it's one of 12 places around the world that still does, would that have made Taiwan safer? No, certainly not. It has no military benefit to Taiwan. It has no economic benefit to Taiwan. But Taiwan does like to show the world that it can still conduct international relations and diplomatic relations, and that its leader could fly around the world to visit countries that do have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So it is very frustrating for the government of Taiwan. But it is more about the optics. Again, it didn't going there or being unable to go to Eswatini. It practically doesn't mean much for Taiwan's either military or economic security. But it is very frustrating for the Taiwan government.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, it's so far right now, they seem to be, especially in relation to its economy, seems to be flying high, especially with AI booming. So we'll keep a close eye on that. So thank you so much for coming onto the program to explain that, Mr. Feingold. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, you're watching Daybreak on A News. We're going to take a quick break and go back to some other news referring to what's going on in Europe. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's head over to this day in Europe. France is facing rising economic pressure from the Iran conflict as energy costs go up and public finances come under strain. The government is responding by freezing spending and offering targeted support while trying to avoid adding to inflation. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where France is now feeling the economic fallout from the Iran conflict. Officials say the crisis already cost the country between 4 to 6 billion euros, driven largely by soaring energy prices and sharply higher borrowing costs. Finance Minister Roland Lescure says rising debt servicing alone is adding around 3.6 billion euros to the budget as markets react to prolonged instability in the Middle East. That pressure is being felt across the economy. Higher oil prices are feeding directly into fuel, transport, and production costs, raising concerns about a renewed wave of inflation just as price growth had started to ease. In response, France will freeze 6 billion euros in spending to offset the impact and try to keep France's deficit under control, already one of the highest in the Eurozone. At the same time, targeted support measures will be rolled out to shield the most exposed sectors, including fishing, farming, and transport, as well as low-income workers who depend heavily on their cars. But officials are under pressure from both sides of the political spectrum, with calls for broader fuel tax cuts and energy price caps, demands the government has so far resisted, warning that untargeted support could fuel inflation and further strain public finances. Across Europe, the picture is similar. Higher energy prices, rising bond yields, and tightening fiscal space, all complicating efforts to support growth. For France, the message is very clear. This is no longer just an energy shock, but a fiscal one, forcing difficult trade-offs between protecting households, supporting industry, and maintaining budget discipline as the economic ripple effects of the crisis deepen. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Turning to some entertainment news, and Madonna is offering a reward after several of her vintage stage costumes went missing following her appearance at the popular US music festival Coachella. The items, including a purple jacket, corset and dress worn during a surprise performance, are part of my history, is what the singer said. Police say the costumes and jewelry were last seen on a golf cart in the early hours of Saturday, adding there was no evidence of theft and said the items may have fallen during transport. Thank you for watching Daybreak with me. That's the end of the program, but please stay tuned to A News as we'll bring you more information on the key stories making its way throughout the day. I'll be back tomorrow to go through the latest headlines, so make sure you stay with me. Take care.